This is one of those stories that may not sound huge at first, but the more you look at it, the more it feels like something Bengals fans should really be paying attention to. Because every year, there are players nobody talks about in July who suddenly become part of the conversation once camp starts. And for Cincinnati, that could happen again. There are a few under-the-radar guys fighting for real roles, and if even one of them breaks through, it could quietly change the depth of this roster in a big way. So let's talk about it, because this could get interesting fast. If you're ready for Bengals football, hit that like button and drop "Who Day" in the comments. Something is being missed around Cincinnati right now, and that is usually where the most interesting training camp stories begin. Everybody can talk about the obvious names. Everybody can talk about the players who were drafted, the bigger signings, the defensive additions, the familiar starters, the names already getting attention before camp even opens. But sometimes the player who changes the bottom of the roster solves a quiet problem or forces the coaching staff into a real decision is not the guy fans are debating every day. And with Bengals training camp only about 3 weeks away, there are 3 names sitting in that exact spot: Javon Foster, Jair Taylor, and Keshawn Williams. And that is what makes this conversation so important. Because this is not about predicting a superstar breakout. This is not about forcing hype where it does not belong. This is about looking at the roster and asking a very simple question. Who is flying under the radar right now, but could actually matter once the pads come on? Let's start with the offensive line, because this is where things get more interesting than people realize. The Bengals are in a different situation up front than they have been in for most of Joe Burrow's career. For the first time, they bring back all 5 starting offensive linemen. That alone changes the tone of the room. Orlando Brown Jr. and Amarius Mims are there at tackle. Dylan Fairchild is developing after what was described as a really good rookie season. Dalton Reisner came in on a 1-year deal before free agency and was described as a bargain. Ted Karras is still under contract. Then Cincinnati also added Brian Parker and Connor Lew, with Jalen Rivers and Cody Ford also in the mix. So on the surface, it feels like the Bengals have bodies. It feels like the line has more stability than usual. But when you look closer, the question becomes very specific. Who is the swing tackle? Who is the backup tackle Cincinnati can actually trust if something goes wrong? That is where Javon Foster comes in. Foster is not the name most fans are talking about right now, but he might be one of the most important dark horse names on the roster. The Bengals added him to their practice squad last year after he came into the league as a former 4th-round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars. In Jacksonville, he only played on special teams during the regular season, so this is not a player with a long resume of offensive snaps. But the profile is the reason he is worth watching. The idea is not that Foster walks in and becomes a starter tomorrow. The idea is that, with development, he could become the backup swing tackle Cincinnati needs. And that matters because those roster spots are not just names on a depth chart. Those spots become real. The second one, offensive tackle, gets banged up. Nobody wants to think about that scenario, but every serious team has to prepare for it. If Foster can show enough during camp and preseason, he suddenly becomes more than just a practice squad addition. He becomes a player the Bengals may have to seriously discuss when final roster decisions arrive. That is the kind of camp battle fans should pay attention to. Not because it is flashy, not because it will dominate headlines on day 1, but because if Javon Foster looks solid in preseason game number 1, then looks competitive in joint work against the Bears, and then follows it up again in preseason game number 2, the conversation changes fast. Suddenly, the question is no longer, who is that? It becomes, can Cincinnati really keep him off the roster? And that is the first name to circle. The second name is on defense, and this one has a clearer path to immediate relevance: Jair Taylor. Taylor is interesting because he is not just some random camp body. He played in all 17 games last year for the Chargers. Over the past 3 seasons, he has played in 17, 16, and 17 games. A lot of that work has come on special teams, but that is exactly why he has a real chance to stick. Coaches value players who can help on special teams right away, especially when those same players are fighting for a role on defense. Now, let's be honest about the situation. Jalen Davis appears to be clearly ahead in the nickel corner battle. He is described as the favorite by far, so this is not being framed like Taylor is walking into camp as the obvious starter. It is an uphill climb, but that does not mean there is no path. Taylor's path is actually pretty simple. Prove he is too valuable on special teams to leave off the roster. Then take advantage of every defensive snap he gets. That is how a player like this forces the staff to keep looking at him. And that is where Taylor has an edge. His special teams experience has kept him in the league, and now he may get more of a chance than he has had in the past to show whether he can be a quality nickel corner. That is the key word here: chance. He is 27 years old, right in the part of his career where he should be in his prime, and if he can combine special teams reliability with defensive flashes, this becomes a real battle. That is why this name cannot be ignored. Taylor does not need to become a star to matter. He needs to make the roster, make the staff trust him, and make the nickel conversation uncomfortable. If he does that, Cincinnati may have found a player who gives them depth, special teams value, and competition at a spot that still deserves attention. So now, Bengals fans have 2 different under-the-radar stories developing before camp even begins. One is Javon Foster, the possible swing tackle answer. The other is Jeer Taylor, the experienced special teams player trying to push for nickel corner snaps. And both fit the same theme. Players who are not getting the loudest attention right now, but could become much bigger conversations once camp starts. And that leads to the third name, the one on offense who may have the most direct chance to change a game if he earns a role. Before we get into that, drop your thoughts in the comments. Between Javon Foster and Jeer Taylor, which under-the-radar Bengal do you think has the better chance to actually make an impact this season? And that third name is Keyshawn Williams. And honestly, this might be the one Bengals fans should watch very closely once the preseason starts. Because when you look at this roster, there is already going to be plenty of attention on Kobe Young. That makes sense. He is the draft pick, so people are naturally going to talk about him. There is also the situation with Andre Yosvage being in a contract year, so that will be part of the conversation too. But Keyshawn Williams is sitting in a different lane. He is not the loud name right now. He is not the guy everyone is already penciling in. But he has one thing that can change a roster battle very quickly: return ability. And that is where this gets interesting. Williams only played 3 games for the Bengals last season, so no, we are not talking about a huge sample size. But in those 3 games, he showed enough to make this conversation real. Before Cincinnati picked him up, he had 425 kick return yards with the Steelers. Then, in the final 3 games with the Bengals, he had 203 return yards. He also averaged over 10 yards per punt return with Cincinnati, after doing the same thing in Pittsburgh, and averaged over 25 yards per kickoff return as well. That is not something to just ignore. Because when you are fighting for one of those final receiver spots, it is not always about being the most polished offensive player. Sometimes it is about giving the team something it needs on Sundays. And if Keyshawn Williams can be reliable as a kickoff returner, reliable as a punt returner, and still make a few plays on offense, then suddenly he becomes a serious problem for the rest of that roster bubble. The name to watch in that battle is Charlie Jones. Williams is likely fighting with him for that spot, And the point here is not that Jones is out of the picture. Far from it. Jones reportedly had a strong minicamp, and he has plenty to prove, too. But that is what makes the battle so good. Jones is not really flying under the radar the same way Keyshawn Williams is. Williams feels like the guy people may overlook now, then start talking about fast if he pops in camp. And remember, he is only 24 years old. He is 5'9", 188 pounds, and he came into the league undrafted. That profile is not going to overwhelm people on paper. But returners are judged by what happens when the ball is in their hands and the field opens up. If he gives Cincinnati field position, security, and a little spark, he has a real path. So when you put all three names together, this is the real story. Javon Foster could challenge for a swing tackle role, Jeer Taylor could push at nickel while helping on special teams, and Keyshawn Williams could make the roster because of return value. None of them are guaranteed. All of them have a lot to prove. But that is exactly why training camp matters. Now, I want to hear from Bengals fans. Which one of these under-the-radar players do you believe has the best chance to make the roster and actually matter this season? Javon Foster, Jeer Taylor, or Keyshawn Williams? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that like button if you want more Bengals updates like this, and subscribe to stay locked in all the way through training camp. Go Bengals!